Okay, my name is Mrs. Moncur, and I will be teaching you social studies mapping skills. Our focus today will be map scales, okay? So at the end of this lesson, we hope that you're able to define and explain the purpose of map scales, identify 3 different types of map scales, and of course, demonstrate the use of the linear and bar scale. Feel free to ask any questions as we proceed with this lesson. Now, I know map scales is something that you would have done already because it is a grade 7 topic. Because we are preparing for BJC, we know that you are going to require this skill. So it's good for us to review mapping skills, especially when it comes to measuring the distance between one place to the next. Right, so let's just get back to basics for a bit. What is map scale? Well, map scale is the ratio between one set of measurements. Scale helps take real-life distances and measurements and fit them in a much smaller space. What does that really mean? Pretty much measuring from point A to point B. All right, let's continue. So you may be wondering, and by now you probably already know, what is the purpose of map or scales? Well, map scales help you to measure the distance or to know the distance on a map. It also helps to create the distance from one point to the next, okay? If you're traveling, you're going to the States. Now, normally nowadays we use the GPS, but we don't use the maps as we used to use when I was a kid. But maps usually help when you're trying to find one location to the next. All right, so you would know not only the direction, but maybe how long it will take you to get there. All right, if you are an airplane pilot, you would want to know the scale in terms of how long it will take you to fly from one place to the next. That way you are able to at least know how much gas you need. You don't want to have persons in your plane and you don't even know how long this is going to take. All right, so it's amazing. Everyday people use maps. All right, let's continue. 3 types of scales you should know. Yeah. So the first one we're going to look at is a word scale. Now, the word scale is a little bit easier. It's a lot different from the others. And it's not commonly used, but it is still a skill that you need. All right? So word scales use words to show relationship between map distances and real life distances. Okay, so for example, on my screen, it says 1 inch equals 10 miles. All right, so all that is saying, every 10 miles, that's only 1 inch, right? 1 inch for every 10 miles. All right, now, this is the bigger question. Let's have a quick practice. What if we say, calculate the actual distance for the following if 1 inch equals miles. Let's look at these quick word problems. Now we're going to do mental math and social studies, all right? Now, let's look at A. A says 2.5 inches equals blank miles. And B says 5 inches equals blank miles. And C says 10 inches equals blank miles. All right, so let's try and see if we can do this real quick so that we can at least have an idea of what the answers would be. All right, you don't need a calculator. You don't even need paper. We're going to do it mentally because it's so easy, and I know you know how to do this, right? Good. So let's look at A. If your answer is 5, you're correct. How did we get that 5? Okay, so 2 times 2 plus 1 equals 5. Where did I get that 1 from? Okay, let's look at, because the 1/2 inch equals, if 1 inch equals 2 miles, then 1/2 of 2 is 1. So that's where I got the 1 from. All right, just in case you were trying to recall this information. I know it's been a few years, but it will come back. Let's look at B. Five inches, if your answer is 10, then you are correct. All right, so 5 times 2 equals 10 miles. And if your answer for C is 20, then you are also correct. 10 times 2 equals 20. All right? Now let's try it just to make it a little bit difficult. That was just to start us, to get us warmed up. All right? Calculate the actual distance for the following if 1 inch equals 8 miles. Let's look at these. I'll give you a few minutes to try, well, a few seconds, because this is so easy. You're going to get this like a piece of cake. Right, so the first one is 2 inches equals blank miles. E would be 1/4 inch equals blank mile. And C will be 10.5 inches equals blank miles. Anybody have any answers yet? All right. I see some persons look like they're working. Okay. Let's check our answers. 2 inches equals 16 miles. Did you get that? Awesome. All right, so 2 times 8 equals 16. E equals 2 miles. All right, 1/4. Now that 8 represents 8 being the whole number. And so that really is 8 over 1. And all we have to do is multiply, well, cross out how many times 4 can go into 8, which is 2. And that's how we got our answer. So our answer is 2 miles. And the last one, this one was kind of tricky for some people. Okay, so 10 times 8 plus 4 equals 84, right? Where did I get that 4 from? Okay, let me quickly explain. We're looking at 1/2 of 8. 1/2 of 8 is 4, all right? So 10 times 8, which is 80, plus 4 is 84, all right? Good job. Let's move on. Now, number 2 is a representative fraction. That's our second type of math, right? Fraction is a fraction that shows relationship between map distances and real life distances. Right. So this would read 1, every 1 will be equal to 2,000. And our next, a third one would be the linear or bar scale. Now this is very popular, and this is pretty much what's mostly tested during our BJC examinations. And it pretty much says, use a line or bar to show the relationship between map distances and real life distances. Okay, so there's an example that shows line or bar scale. And if you notice, especially with the top one, there's kilometers at the top, and there's miles at the bottom. Now we have to be very careful because we have to follow instructions. So if the question asks your answers in miles, then you have to use the bottom numbers or the bottom digit, all right? That's where you would get your measurements or your answers from. And of course, if they ask for your answers in kilometers, then you would use the top bar. Right? Now we're going to spend more time on bar scale because it is actually what's needed, or what is required the most. Let's move on. How to use a linear or bar scale. Right. So this is what you're going to need if you want to follow this lesson thoroughly. You're going to need a strip of paper. You're going to need a pencil or a pen, preferably a pencil, so that if you make any mistakes, you could always erase. Then you're going to need, of course, a map of the Bahamas. Now, the ones I like to use are the ones that are found in any of your past BJC booklets. Okay, so if you have one sitting home somewhere, any of the past BJC booklets of any year, because they're pretty much all the same, this is what you want to use. And then, of course, if you're using that, you could just turn page 12. For the most part, they're usually around page 12 or page 11. But you just look through, and you will find the map of the Bahamas in particular, because that's what we're looking at today. All right, if you're all set, then I guess we could get started. All right, let's move on. Okay, it's activity time. Now, this isn't going to take very long. Let's just say we have to measure or we are asked to measure the distance between Nicholstown, Andros, and Governor's Harbor, Eleuthera. And they ask us for our answers in miles. What do we do? Okay, let's just see. Well, first of all, we need to know where Nicholstown, Andros, and Governor's Harbor, Eleuthera is. So, big thing, students, you need to know the map of the Bahamas. You need to know how to label it, and you also need to know the main settlements. Okay, so if you don't know it yet, this is a perfect time for you to start practicing labeling the blank map of the Bahamas. Because if you don't know it, your answers are going to be so wrong, simply because you may know the skill, you may not know the island or the main settlement location. So you may be measuring something completely different. And that will work against you, and we don't want that, right? So let's look at this map. So Andros is, of course, the largest island in the Bahamas. We know that. And on this map, you're going to see small little black dots or points. These represent main settlements. So one of the good things about this map is, as long as you know the island, and you would automatically know the location of the main settlement because it's already given. You must know the island, okay? Awesome. All right, so When we are measuring the distance from one point to the next, there are some key things we need to remember. Let's see if we could watch this short little clip that will help us or give us some guidance, all right? Notice it's going from point to point. That's Nicholstown. Awesome. Okay, so using the scale is very important, students. Good. So if you're asked to give the answer in miles, all right, so if you're asked to give the answer in miles, when you are practicing, you're going to need that extra piece or that extra strip of paper. Without that, it's going to be almost impossible to give the answer. Now, there are some ways we can do it, because some people use an actual ruler. If that's the way you have been taught and you're comfortable doing it that way, that's fine. I like the old-fashioned way where we make our own little measurement using extra strip of paper. So you could actually ask for an extra strip of paper if that's the way you're comfortable doing it. All right, let's move on. All right, so on this little short clip, you're going to see how we actually put the paper up to the scale to ensure that we have the correct measurements, all right? Let's go through this real quick. Remember to do the marking, that's very important. Okay, make sure the label and the marking measures up to the same place so your measurement won't be off. It's very important. Keep the pattern. Keep the pattern. Okay. Okay, so before we go on to our step 3, we have to remember there's a pattern. And whatever that pattern is, that's what we need to keep. So if we're counting in fives, 5, 10, 15, 20, then you know you need to continue on with that. If it's tens, and in this case, it was 25s, okay? And so you have to stick with the numbers that scale gives you and don't invent your own, all right? Let's move on. Now, this will be the final point. And as you can see, it took us right back to this map because we're just going to show you how we measure from point to point. And with using, let's just pretend that red line is a strip of paper. And if you notice, you're measuring from that point, which is Nicholstown and Andros, that point, which is Governor's Harbor, Eleuthera, right? Now, if we had the time, we were able to do, and we had our resources, which is the map of the Bahamas, and we were able to do it collectively together, it would have been perfect, because then we would have been able to actually see what everyone thought. But in the essence of time, let's look at what the answer is. The answer should be 113 to 115 miles, right? And now you might say, Ms. Moncur, well, why do you have two answers? Well, because we're giving an estimate. Remember, an estimate doesn't necessarily mean that let's say one digit or one answer. It could mean that it's between or it's a range of answers. So if you did your measurement and you got 113, and it's very possible that you're on the right track. 114, yes. 115, yes. Now, in some cases, let's say you got maybe 112, that still doesn't mean you're wrong. That means you are still within that range of numbers. All right. Now, if you get something like 100, which is completely off, and yeah, we're gonna have to redo that again. All right. Now, if you got something like 120, 130, I've seen some really bogus answers. 200, and you know you are completely off, which means you gotta check your scale again and then do the measurement again. All right. I hope that was clear. I hope we understand. I hope that we got it, and so that we could move on. All right, so we have some independent practice that I want us to do today for the remainder of our session. All right, before we start to entertain some question and answers. All right, so we're going to use the map of the Bahamas from any past booklet, as I said before, measure the directions of these questions 1 through 3. And of course, we're giving our answers in miles. All right, so number 1, we have Freeport to Freeport, Grand Bahama to Nassau, which is in New Providence. And then for number 2, we have Georgetown, Exuma, Arthurstown, Cat Island. And then for number 3, we have Spring Point, Acklands, to Matthewtown, Inagua. All right. I want you to quickly write this down, and I'm going to tell you why, and I'll just chat with you a bit while I give you some time to write. Okay, so Freeport, which is in Grand Bahama, and we're measuring to Nassau, which is in New Providence, and then we're going to do Georgetown, which is in Exuma, to Arthurstown, which is in Cat Island, and Spring Point, Acklands, to Matthewtown, Inagua. Okay, so now that you have it all jotted down, we would want to use a map of Bahamas, again, from any of your BJC books. And the reason why I'm asking you to use this, because we want our answers to be around the same. So if we're using different resources, and that means we may get a different reading, which will make you completely off from the answer that we are looking for, okay? So if you don't have one, and just write this down, and then we're going to go through the answers, and then when you get one, what you can do is you can still try to work it out on your own to see if you come up with the same answer. Good? All right. Now, we are now going to look at the answers. Let me tell you why we're going to look at the answers. We're going to look at the answers because I want you, once this session is finished, take your time, follow the steps, and do the measurements for the aforementioned islands or distances, okay? And then I want you to check your answer with the answer I have. So The answer for number 1 is 31 miles. Of course, if there's a range of 30 to 33, that means you're definitely hot red and you're on the right track, okay? For question number 2, the answer would be 57 miles. And of course, if you have 56 through 58, that's also accepted. That means you're right on the mark, right? And for number 3, the answer should be, or the answer we're looking for, is 105 miles. And that's from any range from 102 to 106 can be accepted. All right, remember, the answers are estimates. Because the answers are estimates, and it is possible that it could be a range, all right, from one point to the next, and you want to stay within that range. Anything over or under that range means that you would have to try and redo it, see if you can get as close to it or on it as possible. All right, well, I know you did a super job. So now what we have to do is we need to start to review some settlements, because we need to make sure we know these islands and settlements. All right, let me see if I can get to that screen, just 1 minute. Okay, so let's go back to the map of the Bahamas. So now that we're back to the map of the Bahamas, what will happen if we have to measure the distance between, like how we just did Nicholstown to Andros, Nicholstown, Andros to Nasabi, Luthra? What would happen if we had to measure the distance between, let's say, Nicholstown, Andros to Arthurstown, Cat Island? Or better yet, let's say Freeport, which is in Grand Bahama, to Arthurstown in Cat Island. If you note the distance, just from looking at it, we can see that the scale that is given to us is too short. How then are we able to measure the distance if the scale is too short? Well, simply this. Remember the video we saw with using map, getting the paper, and we would measure until we get to the end of the scale. In this case, the scale ends at 125. Well, where that mark 125 is on the paper, we would then move it to 0. We would take that paper with the 125 on it, and we would line it up with the 0 on that scale. And then we would start putting our points together again. And remember, we're counting in 25s. And so when you move from 125 to the next point, what would that point be? And if we're moving in 25s, what do? That means at every point, we add 25. Okay? Then we would do it as long as we need it in terms of being able to measure the question or to answer the question that was asked, right? So that is a tricky one that sometimes some students kind of not get, because they're like, well, this scale is too short. So that's a quick way of answering that. And students, again, it all comes with practice. Practice, 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 all right? It comes with practice. It's not going to happen overnight. And again, practice scales, but also practice knowing the islands of the Bahamas and their main settlements, so that you wouldn't be measuring the wrong settlements on the wrong island, which will give you the wrong answer. All right. Okay, so let's try to see if there's any other questions that students may have. Okay, seems like everybody's getting this really good. All right, so let's look at getting a bit distracted here, looking at some of the questions that were being asked. How do we, somebody asked about extending the scale. Okay, that's one of the things I just mentioned. When you have to extend the scale, all you have to do is make sure start at the point 0. You're using what they ask you for. Of course, if they ask for the answer in kilometers, what then would you do? You would then just use numbers at the top bar, not the bottom bar. All right? And the top bar, again, both again with 0. You would have to use the number pattern that's given. And if you notice, the scale in kilometers are different. The number pattern is different from the number pattern in miles. All right, so pay very close attention to that. All right. Okay, good. Why is it important for you to memorize the settlements? Again, it's important for you to memorize the settlements because you may know the scale, so you may know how to measure the distance, but you may not be measuring the right distance. So if you're asked to measure Nicholstown, Governor's Harbor, because you don't know the islands, you measure something completely off, that's going to give you a wrong answer because the distances may not even be the same. Okay? How do we know where the settlements are? Again, that's why the map of the Bahamas would have these points or these little round dots. Simply let you know it's an indication that it's a settlement. If you look in the map key shows you exactly what the settlements are. All right. Now, since we are reviewing maps and we do have a few some more time, we could also look at the map key. Why is it important for you to know the symbols in the map key? Well, because that's the way how you're going to read the map, right? Of course, the compass will be at the top. Compass is another thing that we're going to review in a later lesson. So you have to remember that every map has a compass. And the compass is important because it shows direction, gives direction. It allows you to know which direction to head in or that you're going in, all right? And you have the 4-point compass, which are called the cardinal points. That is very important to know. You need to know the cardinal points because that will help you to explore where else you need to go. You have the 8-point compass, which are the intermediate points. Then, of course, you have 16-point compass. That gets a little bit complicated, but it just gives a more exact location. All right? If you notice in the map key here, we have the map of the Bahamas that has variation in color. It's not the best because of the way it's in the slide, but we can see that the map is different shades. You have this light area here, then you have this darker area here. Well, what does that mean? And sometimes there's a question on the BJC that asks, well, what's the depth of the water between the islands of Andros and Exuma, for example? How would we get to figure that out? Because in your mind, you would be like, well, I really don't know. Well, the answer really is you do. Because on the map key, actually, shows you the light area and the dark area. The light area will tell you the depth of the water, all right, which is anywhere from 0 to 600,000 feet, it looks like. Can't see it too well, right? So the lighter the area is the more shallow the water is in comparison with the darker area where the water is much deeper, right? And so it's very important for you to actually look and see what is given to you so that you're able to at least know where's the shallow water, where's the light, what the lighter color shade of water means versus the darker shade. Right, now these arrows that you would see on this map, the arrows also mean something. These arrows represent bodies of water that are also connected to the islands of the Bahamas. This is another thing that you would need to know. You need to know the bodies of water as it relates to the Bahamas, because you may not be required to measure bodies of water. You may be required to give the name of the body of water, okay? And so that's another lesson within itself. When you look at the map of the Bahamas, you would know that the map of the Bahamas would actually give you the names of all these different bodies of waters, and it will also help you with the settlements. Like my map here, if you can see it, actually outlines pretty much all of the bodies of water, the main settlements, islands. It gives you a very good idea of how to read the map of the Bahamas. And so if you really want to do well in the map section of BJC, and remember it is a requirement, it's worth 10 marks, you really would need to remember your mapping skills. A tip I can give you is when you are studying, have your atlas, have your past BJC paper, and look for your old grade 7 books. Those notes work, they help. And go through the map section of the map of the Bahamas and practice, practice, practice. I can't say that enough. Practice makes perfect. And these things may come across as being a little bit difficult now. But the more you practice, it's the better it's going to be. All right? Let's go up to one of my other screens that I want to show you just as a recap. Let's recap some of the things that we would have looked at today. All right, so we would have learned the importance of maps. We would have looked at what maps really are, and why are map scales important, and most of all, who needs them. And we would have learned that map scales help you measure the distance from one place to the next. All right. We would also remember that measuring a distance from one place to the next is very important because it will help you know the exact, not only knowing the exact distance, again, the analogy or the example I gave earlier, let's just use a boat. You know, maybe you're an aspiring boat captain. You want to fuel up, take some people on a tour from one little key to a next. And you want to know what's the distance between these keys. Then you would have to be able to have an idea of how much gas that's going to take. So it will help you in even that way. All right. Let's look at, again, there were 3 types of scales that we would have reviewed. One being the word scale, where we actually had to work out some word problems. And We also had to look at representative fraction, which isn't as popular as the word fraction. But it's also good to know it might be a multiple choice question. Identify what type of what type of scale is a representative fraction based on what's listed. Then they may have 3 different types, and you need to be able to identify that. Of course, once you see the way it is written, you would know automatically that it's a representative fraction because it's written completely different from a word scale, and it's definitely completely different from a linear or bar scale. All right? Bar scale is what we spend most of the time on today because bar scales are most popular, more popular. It's definitely one that will come on your BJC, the map of the Bahamas, as it relates to the question. It would, you have to be careful when you're reading the question because they would ask you specifically for your answer to be in kilometers or miles. So don't measure kilometers if the question asks your answers to be in miles, because even if your kilometers are correct, you may still get it wrong because you didn't follow the instructions. Okay? We also reviewed under linear or bar scale. We also looked at how or why it is so important for us to not only know the islands of the Bahamas, but knowing their settlements so that we are able to measure the distance properly and carefully. All right? So measuring from one distance to the next, and let's say we have to measure from way up in the north up to Abaco, down in the south to Maguana or Cricket Island. The distance between them is very great, and the scale that's given to us may be very, very short. Remember, you would have to extend your scale. How do you extend a scale? By using the measurements given. After you would have placed your paper on the scale that's presented, and you would have marked out in miles or kilometers, depending on what they ask, from 0 to the last bar, when you would have written or when you would have wrote your last answer down. If it's 125 miles, and you take that bar that says 125, you line it up with the 0. And once you line it up with the 0, you continue on counting in 25s, because this scale requires you to know to count your counting bars of 25. So you're just adding 25 every time you pass a bar. Then you measure the distance, all right? By then, your scale should be pretty good. All right, another thing that I want us to remember, that when we get our answers are usually estimated. Before that, another thing I want you to remember is you do measure from point to point, okay? From point to point, not from island to island. So just because you see, oh, I know where Andres is, I know where Eleuthera is, you just measure any point on Andros and anywhere on Eleuthera, it's going to be wrong. You have to look at the settlement. That point represents the settlement, okay? And then the last thing that I wanted to remind you of is that the answers are usually given in estimates, and I would encourage you to do as much practice as possible. Speak with your teachers, especially when you have the opportunity, when we have the opportunity to return back to school. Speak with your teachers, see if you're on the right track. And then if you have a friend while you are home, call them on the phone, send them a WhatsApp message, and find out if they got the same answer as you did. And that way you could compare to see if you're off. Now you already know the answers.